Bus versus rail debate is stupid. No, it is not. Buses are terrible. Their encroachment has been a disaster for public transport. I thought everyone was on the same page with this, but apparently some people are really out of touch with history. Basing their entire perspective on capacity is pretty strange when you understand induced demand and what that does, with capacity and then ridership for any mode of transportation. In his next argument, the study that he's leading on assumes that all the vehicles in question are heavy rail, which bumps project costs considerably. Then we get complaints about the reliability of his lines to stay online, which is pretty rich considering that oftentimes buses don't even show up. I get that transit agencies are based around metrics and that they can just blame things like red lights or traffic and that it's very convenient for them, but that does not fly with me. His next argument is that there's a 2 mile long trolley line that's basically a gimmick and took federal dollars to do a jobs program that happened to have a trolley attached, coming in at around $13 million of their own local money for a long shot at boosting an area's economy, and the rest being federal dollars. That's just a bargain. SEPTA's Route 15 is 4 times longer than that and is an example of a real trolley line. Now, if we replace that trolley with a bus that runs the same exact route, the same stations, all of that, do you think ridership's going to go up or down? We both know the answer. His next argument is that ridership creates permanence, except the lines from Reading were very popular through to train cancellation, and then it was suddenly replaced with bus lines in a process called bustitution. The line died completely as ridership plummeted down to nothing. Studies suggest strong ridership if ever it was reactivated, but the line is now a bike trail. Good luck getting it turned back, because once it's gone, it's pretty much gone for good. The same thing happened pretty much around the world, and your argument can shift to, but if they'd kept on riding, except people are under no obligation to patronize public service if that service sucks. I know it's a meme to say, look at Japan and what they're doing, but it's true. If you take it and make it good enough to where it is that people with other options are still using it, then you've succeeded with your transit. Then he complains about having to develop the land around a transit stop. But yeah, that's exactly how that works. That's how Japan Rail makes money. They own the malls around their stations. Obviously, a transit authority can't do that. That's so far out of scope for them, it's not even funny. So the closest thing that they can do is give land tax abatements and things like that. It's what they've got. The only real viable alternative to this is to create a park and ride, and nobody likes park and rides. They're terrible for the neighborhoods that are all around them because at this point, what you're doing is creating a high volume, high speed, just volume of cars coming out of the parking lot, just trying to get home or to wherever they're going as quickly as possible. That's not really ideal for anybody local to the area. Unfortunately, just due to minimum lot sizes and, minimum setbacks and minimum road width for emergency vehicles, there's no way to build these streetcar suburbs the way that we used to, like in Pittman, New Jersey, or in Somerville, New Jersey, and there's a lot of pedestrianization around those areas. They are really quite nice. They're very close to the train station, and they stand in pretty decent contrast to what it is that he was talking about. But we cannot build them anymore thanks to regulation. The first to go was the rural trolleys, which early buses wiped out, and the Depression finished off just about the rest of them in the 1930s. As traffic has grown to where it is that buses are at the mercy of traffic, red lights, and indirect backroad routes, these rail lines are getting sorely missed. The level of service provided is sort of a mix between light trucks and buses. They were often found in rural areas, sort of managing delivery to small towns. These routes, again, died out way before the mail carriers switched off in the 1960s. They're historically very underexplored, and it's hard to find these through all the overgrowth and developments that have come up since, especially since at the time they were servicing really, really small areas. There were no buses at the time, and practically any competition in any form sort of spelled a dismal fate for a lot of them. So it's really interesting to look into these things, but they are unfortunately the first to go. All right, the second type to die off were the interurbans, which are basically fast trolleys that occasionally hook onto each other. They served mid-sized towns and were a fair bit faster, but not really heavy rail either. And just like the rural trolleys, they also could work freight. Some of them lasted, most of them failed, again in the 1930s, and the 50s were also pretty tough on them as well, with highways and buses starting to become really quite a threat. Then the third to die is going to be the urban trolley, which needs no introduction. And then right after that one, what we've got is the ones that ran on heavy rail, even if they themselves were not heavy. In fact, they were so light that they couldn't even trip the sensors on heavy rail some of the time. It really did cause them some problems further on. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, all four of these were destroyed by their carriers, and this was over the user's objection, and all of them were replaced by buses in one sense or another. But before we get carried away with that, I wanted to first take a look at all the things it is that we've actually lost. Here is a map of the abandoned railroad systems, but this is a very, very incomplete one, actually. As it turns out, the losses are even worse, and this famous map is years out of date. I've learned of the existence of dozens of more, especially light rail and these rural trolleys, that just simply aren't on here. As I've mentioned, they're quite hard to find and even harder to track. I've added a few myself in the time since, and there are just so many more that aren't cataloged. And it's not even just a matter of finding them, but also practicality. We could not add the trolleys to, for instance, the map in Philadelphia. Here's how it would look if we tried, and it would be almost illegible. Something worth a mention is that this one right there with the red and the gold, those ones right there, yeah, that is 1940. So at this point, the Great Depression has hit. We have already lost a lot of these rural lines. We've also lost a lot of the interurbans. And despite that, this map also does not include the R1 to R8 lines, the regional rail lines. This does not include the B&O Railroad, the Reading, the C&J, the Newark Penn. This was 1940. We've already lost two legs on the stool, and this is still what's there. All of this replaced completely by buses. And you know what? Let's talk a little about that. The bus from Philadelphia to Reading now runs 4 times a day after it replaced two trains. One of them used to run once an hour on the hour, and it was called the Red Devils. It would run at about 100 miles an hour, and it would get to Reading over an hour faster than the bus does currently. And we can say the same thing about the Bethlehem line. Similar thing, much faster, good ridership, gone. Look at this. I mean, look at this. How is it that we can say that, the infrastructure has gotten better? Oh, but buses. Okay, yeah. Well, these things had ridership. They've been replaced. How is this helpful? We are subsidizing vehicle transport. This can be in the form of cars, trucks, and buses. None of them are really paying their own way. Gas tax doesn't even come close, neither do licensing fees, registration. None of that stuff adds up to even a fraction of what you really need to actually maintain the roads. And same thing with tolls, all that other stuff. If you would actually charge trucks the amount of damage that they do to the roadway surface, it would add up to a lot more than what we're paying for shipping for various goods that we receive. All right. Now with this, I think you can see where I'm going. A bus only has two axles, and it weighs between 20 to 30,000 pounds. Now I'm going to assume some figures here. I'm going to assume the car is 3,000 pounds. I'm going to assume the bus is around 30,000 pounds. I'm not going to fully load it here or anything like that. I'm just going to put that at about 15,000 pounds per axle, and the car at 1,500 pounds per axle. You can then take each of those up to the fourth power, and what this does is that it means, if my calculation is correct, that the bus axle load is 10,000 times that of a car. So it is damaging the road surface 10,000 times worse than your average car. Hey, you know what's really good at carrying lots of heavy stuff? Rails. Hey, you remember what we used to have out in the countryside where the roads are even thinner than they are in the cities, and cities can't even keep up with the weight of a bus? Yeah, we used to have those rural trolleys. Hey, I've got a crazy idea. Essentially, what I'm arguing for is that we nationalize the rails just as we do the roads, or at least subsidize them equally. The problem is that SEPTA, transit agencies, and such, they don't pay for road upkeep, just like those corporations didn't have to pay for road upkeep either. So they take a look at it and go, well, gee, I have a great line item budget that we could theoretically cut. If we can replace these stupid trains with these wonderful buses, I've got a great, crazy idea here. And so they do that. Take a look at this trolley network. Look at what it is that we've done to it. And this was in the 1990s. This is just what's left of it. And this is after the 1975 fire that wiped out the all the good PCC cars that Philadelphia had mysteriously. But don't worry, that's only a couple of years after it happened in Brisbane, Australia, where it is that they had another mysterious fire that also wiped out all of their trolleys. Huh, it's funny how that keeps happening, isn't it? Oh, by the way, did you know that General Motors was actually, I'm sorry, the holding company for General Motors? Oh, I'm sorry, and Standard Oil and Firestone and a whole bunch. Who else was it again? Phillips Petroleum? Oh, yeah, those guys. Yeah. Did you know that they were, or at least their holding company, was actually found guilty of basically monopolizing and buying up all of the, you know, interurbans and trolleys and stuff like that, and then scrapping them and then trying to, slot in buses? Yeah, right? If buses were the preferred option, they wouldn't have had to have done that.
Companies, transit agencies, both of them see highways, see buses, and see bags of cash with the word savings printed across it. If only those pesky commuters would jump in line and accept worse service, traffic, speed, and sitting at intersections, then everything would go perfectly. It didn't go perfectly. SEPTA and other agencies were formed and took on the duties of several transit companies in order to keep them going, because at this point the network is nothing but a frayed patchwork of what it once was. Those that weren't, such as the Warren Elgin, got cut off from the downtown of Chicago by I 290, and, in order to service buses and cars and things like that, well, it's dead within a couple of years. Even dedicated passenger services on rails see the writing on the walls, and they're trying to get out and jump aboard the subsidy just like they did back in the 1920s and 30s, but this time it really doesn't save them, and they have to get rolled up inside of the transit agencies because this time they've learned, wow, the level of service delivered by buses is actually terrible. Now, to keep us going here with Philadelphia, they roll on the Reading and they roll on to the Pennsylvania Railroad, and they take on a lot of their interurban services, right? SEPTA took on this role relatively well because they were contractually obligated to maintain this level of service. Now, this starts to change as years turns to decades. We'll get around to that, but more importantly, a couple of decades later, we end up with the disastrous merger of Penn Central. And let's talk about not so much the merger that's been talked about to death, but what actually happened with these agencies. After decades of taxation rather than subsidy, the final bits of the rail network collapsed and were folded into the agencies. It turns out, though, these agencies are just as aware of money and expenditure as companies. With these new workers being ex railroad, these guys are more expensive to pay. And with the units in question also being diesel rather than electric for the first time, by court order, they could not be replaced with the cheaper transit operators from the Broad Street subway lines. These guys were actual railroad guys, and the trains that they were running were categorized differently somehow, even though they weren't really any heavier duty. I'm not a judge. I'm not involved in the law. That's not really my problem. What I will say is that all lefty talk of solidarity forever, yeah, that crumbles in the face of reality that unions just do not get along. And I say this as a former union guy with the TWU, okay? Ask any railroad that ever went through a merger how the negotiations go. Or in this case example, the two hated each other so much that the electrical services would leave the station just as the connector enters view, just out of spite. And the TWU did this because they would not enter strikes whenever the other guys did. They were generally on SEPTA's side of things, but that's okay. We'll see how that works out for them. Anyway, SEPTA procedurally gets rid of each of its diesel lines, whether they're commuter rail or whether they're regional rail. It just gets rid of all of them. And now it takes a lot longer, if there's even a service there at all. They tried bustituting it, nobody took it. And yeah, so now there's just nothing. So much for ridership guarantees continuity. Keep in mind, I am vastly oversimplifying this. Some of the lines had great ridership, some of them it collapsed because, again, aforementioned deliberate misses on the interchanges. SEPTA was hard at work trying to get rid of its obligations. Now, the first thing that it did actually made sense, which was, hey, we inherited something from the Penzi, something from the Reading. They run right next to each other. Can we just keep the Penzi and get rid of the Reading? I think that's the one they got rid of. Anyway, that's what they ended up doing. It kind of made sense. They truncated it to Manayunk. Now, as a transit guy, you know that duplication isn't great, but we formed a little circle here with this orange, and you can see on how we've kind of avoided having to go all the way into the hub in order to get somewhere adjacent. It makes sense. I get it. Well, SEPTA says, we're actually thinking that now it's too short, so we're just going to get rid of it, except there's community pushback. So then they say, oh, but they're spalling on the bridge. Look at the bridge, it's falling apart, which is pretty weird because it's really not. It's fine. And so the locals start going, well, let's send a bridge inspector up there. SEPTA drags its feet for 10 years before they send inspectors up there. And guess what? Turns out the bridge is totally fine. Oh, what a relief. We can reopen it now, right? Well, they rip out the rails anyway and they turn it into a bike trail. And then they threaten to cancel it basically, oh, I don't know, any day that ends in a Y. After the rail goes, suddenly it's not viable. And they've tried bustituting, they've tried giving all these different things, and it never works. And these were lines that did justify their continued existence. It just was a matter that SEPTA was not interested in running diesels. And that was just the stuff that they were doing to their main lines. So remember on how I brought up those trolleys earlier and I told you that we'd get around to it? So they ended up restoring one of those lines that I had that were in red. And they did that after immense amounts of public pressure. And there was pressure across the whole thing. Everybody was outraged. Ridership numbers were pitiful. That didn't stop them, though, for the most part. They were finally forced to restore the line for one of them, and begrudgingly, oh so begrudgingly, they restored one of the lines. Now put it back in your pants there, you freaky busboy. All right, now let's hear it out. They actually brought it back in mid 2024 after years of delays. And trust me, it's hilarious watching SEPTA try to pull this shit over and over again. Well, it would be funny if it wasn't so infuriating. Because here's what they keep doing, right? They keep saying, look, we have buses. They're the latest buses. They have handicap lifts. They have air conditioning, Wi-Fi, suspension, fresh suspension, and fresh paint, new interiors, USB charging ports, please, Wi-Fi, please, please. And yeah, nobody takes them. The ridership numbers reflect this. Nobody puts up with this shit. Nobody likes buses. The measure of a system is whether people who have other options are going to take it. People showed up to photograph this thing, to ride this thing. The ridership numbers are great. It's more than a gimmick. It's actually used, and you can see this reflected in the West Philadelphia. They're not even PCCs over there. They don't even have that, oh, classical characteristic charm. No, they're just part of the fleet, and they work. They work well. Meanwhile, over in Australia, in the small town of Brisbane, they apparently in the 1960s had these trams of some sort. And over there, guess what? GM came out for a visit. Guess what happened shortly after? Oh, right, we already talked about that. We already know what happened. Once they abandoned their trams in the 1960s, it took them until the year, I think, 2005 to reach that same level of ridership. Now, in that time, they electrified all their commuter railway lines. They connected them north side to south side. They got express catamarans, to go up and down this river that runs through their city, which they didn't have before. They built busways and bus shelters and bus highways and bus rapid transit. They also got a Japanese built Shinkansen to run to their north side for the first time. All of this stuff was done. And it took all of that to reach the same ridership levels as when they abandoned their trams. Oh, and they also tripled their population. I'm telling you, if you want ridership and if you want butts and seats, you got to ditch the buses as the only form of transport, or as, oh, but they're good enough. Generally speaking, they're not. They are a band aid over a gaping wound that was left by deliberate replacement from agencies and other groups that have external costs, or at least externalize their costs, so that this way they don't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep on things. It's a problem. We have to fix it.